Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ben, and I am a software engineer. And for today's video, I'm going to be going over a app that I wrote in Love2d in Lua that is essentially a times table. You may have seen this also be called a mod multiplication table or a modulus multiplication table, and I'll go over that here shortly. But the difference between those and the one I built is I'm not actually using the modulus operator as you'll see here, and instead I'm having the app kind of draw arcs in a series of parallel paths, if you will. So as you can see here on the right, I have the app running, and I can increment it, and it goes through each of the times tables. You can see the number up top. So for instance, the 2 times table makes this really kind of intricate cardioid shape. And this can actually seem naturally, like if you have a mug with the light shining into an empty mug at a certain angle, it'll show this exact pattern in nature. But essentially the reason why that can happen is what's happening is the light is just refracting off the inner surface of the mug, which is more or less a perfect circle, and each line is being bent or reflected in essentially a straight line in the opposite direction or at the angle of incidence, right, to the mug. And so it keeps going back and forth, and it has this focal point right here and towards the center of the circle. Um, But what today I would like to go through the code I wrote for it. It's pretty simple once it's broken down. Like I said, it is a times table, so I want to go ahead and actually better show that. So for this table, I'm drawing 144 lines, and so that's why it's so detailed and intricate. I want to take this down to, let's say, 10. And we can update that here and rerun the program. Okay, perfect. So as you can see here, what the app is doing is it's drawing a line between 10 discrete points in the circle. And it starts at the rightmost portion of the circle. And you can just count, like it starts at 0, this right portion here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then back again at 10 at the starting point. And that's where modulus comes in. You could calculate this by using modulo to get the remainder of like remainder of points that you need to go to count in order to complete the actual multiplication. So let me just go ahead and explain that too. So here, this is 0.0, and 2 times 0 is 0, which is why you don't really see anything on this side of the circle. But if you go 2 times 1, so if you go here to the number 1 point, 2 times 1 is 2. So then you would draw a line from 1 to 2, and that's what you see. That's why you see that line right there. And it just keeps going like that. So 2 times 2, you start at the 2 point, and 2 times 2 is 4. So you would see a line drawn from 2 to 4, and so on and so forth. And that's how you get this pattern. And it just goes around and around. Now, the problem is when you get to, like, let's say the number 3 times table, you start to overlap the circle. And that's where modulus comes into play because you need to get the remainder of the points once you've completed one full circle, one full rotation of the circle. And then the numbers start to overlap, right? So um, for 3, the multiplication gets so high that it's going to be more than the number of points that we've drawn in the circle. Here we've only drawn 10. So all you would have to do is go 3 times 4, and that would be 12. And so you'd have a remainder of 2. And so you have to count 10 plus 2, and then you would end up in this bottom portion of the circle, and you would draw your line. Now, that's how the circle works. I want to go through the code and kind of explain like what I'm doing through each portion. I'll set this back to 144 because I like the way it looks better than the one with the lower amount of lines. Okay. So in Love2d, if you're not familiar with it, they have a love.load function. This is going to set up all your parameters, all the things that you know for certain aren't going to change, or you already know the value to ahead of time. You can set that up in this love.load function. And so here I have a few things. Set title, pretty self-explanatory. Window size, I went with 1080. And just if you'd like to see more of the designs that get drawn by this, I have a short out that goes through majority of them, or at least all the interesting ones. So definitely check that out. But anyways, so yeah, back to the code. We have a circle radius offset that just leaves a margin right here, the blank space between the circle. Otherwise, we'd have to the circle would end up touching the very edges of the window, and I didn't want that. I wanted a little margin there. Setting the window size is pretty self-explanatory. I do need to get the very central coordinates of the circle, so that's what this calculation is doing. And then the radius, calculating the radius based on the offset that I set earlier. The initial times table number, which is 2. The number of lines I want to draw is 144. And just again, the calculations are all the same. The numbers are all the same. It's just how many points do I want to divide the circle up by is what this number does. That's what that represents. And then I get this circle circumference in radians. This just makes things easier for me in calculations later. Explanatory like button label offset, just so I can center the labels on the button. And then here we go. So this is kind of the central part of how this works. I'm calculating an arc length in radian or rads, and this is important because instead of kind of like manually dividing the circle up by like degrees or like pixel points, I'm just getting the length of the arc in between the 2 points on the circle. And so the more lines I want to draw, this length becomes smaller, right? Because there's only so much space in between each point on the circle that can be drawn, and that's what this represents. And then here's pretty explanatory, just some initial parameters for the buttons that I draw. And then, okay, and so in Love2d, that's your load function, right? There's also a love.draw. Love.draw is where all of the like hard work is done, so to speak, where basically everything's getting drawn anytime anything changes, essentially. And so normally, from what I've seen, these love.draw functions can get pretty big. There are some other helper functions that I'll go through later, but a majority of what you see on the screen is done in the .draw function. Okay, so here we go. These are all, again, pretty self-explanatory. we set the color, we draw the buttons, change the color again, so on and so forth, draw the labels for the buttons. I do notice in Love2d, you do have to kind of be very explicit with that. You don't really get, labels for free or anything like that on buttons and things like that. Basically, everything you see on screen, you have to draw it. And same with the color. There seems to be like a global color profile or parameter that you have to be aware of and set every time you want something to look different or have a different color. Okay, so now I'm printing the times table number at the top, and I have a label for that as well. Okay, so now here's the more mathematical part of the program. So we have our nodes to draw, and what I call them nodes, but basically what it is when you go beyond that two times table, you have to, or I have to kind of trick Love2d into overlapping itself. At least the way I'm drawing this. There is another way that I'll get to later, but the way I'm doing it here is I'm essentially drawing an arc, and I know that can kind of seem confusing, but I'm really only using the arc to use this line function or this line style. And what that means is Love2d will draw an arc based on the parameters, and then it'll draw a line that connects the starting and ending point of the arc. And so that line is what you actually see here, making this intricate design. And the fact that it's closed means that it completely like closes the space that the arc is drawing. So the line goes from the start to the finish. And then, yeah, so that's how this is working. And so when you get to drawing, let's say times table number 3, 4, so on, Love2d really only operates within the circumference of the circle. It doesn't really kind of see beyond that. And so what I'm doing is I'm chunking up each of the, I'm chunking up the number of lines and kind of redrawing them on a different part of the circle. So here we have, and so I'm doing that by saying the times table number -1. So for 4 it'd be 3. That would be I would need to draw 3 nodes essentially. And that's kind of what you see here, right? Here's a node, here's a node, here's another node. And I need to divide their circumference by the number of nodes, right? And that's going to get me my offset, right? So like I said, Love2d doesn't really see beyond, 2 pi. And so what I'm doing is I'm manually getting this offset, I'm calculating that, and I'm using that offset to draw my arc, right? So if I've drawn one node, right, that's basically one rotation of the circle, then I need to move on to the next node. And the only way I can do that is by using this offset to ensure that I'm drawing the arcs in the right spot, right? It wouldn't be symmetrical like it is now. It's perfectly symmetrical. And so, yeah, and so that's why I'm doing that. Like I said earlier, this is the part where you could use modulus. You could use a mod function or a mod operator to actually just draw lines instead of arcs. I'm kind of cheating a little bit by just drawing an arc and then drawing some more arcs on top of that and going, and so on and so forth. It would be more computationally efficient to use mod, Um, Again, the mod is what gets you beyond that to beyond the circumference of a circle, and you won't have to do what I'm doing here, which is kind of drawing over and over again. Um, Here, this when I first wrote this, it made sense to me intuitively to do it this way. Um, uh, for whatever reason, it just makes sense in my head, and I honestly didn't even think of the modulus operator until after the fact. And when I kind of dug more into these designs. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing here. For every node, I'm going through the whole number of lines from 1 to whatever it is, 144, drawing all the arcs, and then going back and then doing it again, um, to complete the full range of the circle, right? Because otherwise it would overlap or it just wouldn't look good, wouldn't look right. And that's how I'm able to achieve that. Like I said, modules would probably be more efficient, but like I said, at the time, this kind of made more sense to me in my head. So yeah, that's how I got that done. And then now we can just move on to the easier stuff where we have a couple more or a few more love built in like library functions. Love that mouse pressed. Here I'm just looking for, did they click the left mouse button? If so, I want to increment um, the times table number. And if they didn't click that button, then I want to decrement. And here I don't want to go beyond below 2 because 1 times 1 is not very fun. So yeah, just 2 and up. And yeah, I wrote these helper functions to do just that, to determine whether or not the click is within the bounds of the button and not outside. So like if I click anywhere else, it doesn't do anything. But if I click the actual buttons, it does something. And that is what these are doing here. And yeah, um that is a times table window Love2d app. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.